afternoon, everyone. My name is José Luis Bazán. I come from Brussels, from COMECE, which is the Commission of Catholic Bishops' Conferences of the EU.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pedro. I'm Portuguese. I'm playing at home, and I come from the first Portuguese NGO that is part in the network, Miru Abrir Caminho.
Good afternoon. I'm Anastamou from Athens, Greece. I represent the Muslim Association of Greece.
Hello, I'm Gabriel. I come from Greece also. I'm from the Ministry of Migration.
Hello, I'm Alice. I'm Italian, but I come from the Netherlands, from Euroclio, the European Association of History Educators.
Hello, Alex Munt, UNHCR. Sorry.
Hello, my name is Moritz. I'm from Austria and I work for the Austrian Embassy.
Hi, my name is Milica Pešić. I'm from Media Diversity Institute, London, UK.
Hello, I'm Andrew. I'm from Birmingham in the UK. I work for the Church of England on interfaith relations and also run a charity that works with young people on interfaith and intercultural dialogue.
Hello, my name is Sofia Caseiro. I'm from Portugal and I am a human rights researcher and in academia.
Hello, I'm Thomas from Switzerland. I'm a Protestant pastor and I'm president of Religious for Peace Europe and European Council of Religious Leaders.
Hello, I'm Lakshmi Vyas. I represent the Hindu Forum of Europe as well as European Council of Religious Leaders and Religion for Peace. I am from UK, London.
Hello, my name is Mladen Kovačević. I'm from Belgrade, Serbia, and from Serbian Orthodox Church.
Hi, my name is Last. I am originally from Zimbabwe, but I now reside in the UK. And I work for a social enterprise called Inini.
Hello, I'm just being introduced previously earlier, but I'm based in Geneva and working at an NGO called Arigato International. Thank you.
I think it's already working.
Hi, I'm Sivin Kit from Malaysia, but now serving with the Lutheran World Federation based in Geneva.
Hi, I'm Daria Alusi, and I'm a strategic communications advisor for Pro-European Association, and I come from Berlin, Germany.
Hello, my name is Taras Dubansky. I come from Ukraine. I teach at the Ukrainian Catholic University.
Hello, my name is Francis. I work at KAICIID and help to run a project on countering hate speech.
Hello, Mohammed Abu Nimr. I'm a professor of peace and conflict resolution, American University, and senior advisor at KAICIID for 6-7 years.
Okay, thank you. I'm Haitham Badawi. I'm from Luxembourg, but originally from Egypt. And I'm from an association called the Training and Awareness Association in Luxembourg and member of the network. And thank you.
Thank you very much. I saw that Imam Senai joined us, so please can you just introduce yourself as well, that we know who's in the room.
Yeah, hello. My name is Senaid Kobelica. I am Chief Imam in the Islamic community Bosnia-Herzegovina in Norway, and also chairman of the Muslim Network for Dialogue in Norway. That's the umbrella organization for all Muslims. At the same time, representative of the Islamic community to the EU institutions, Brussels.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to see that we have such a diverse group of participants joining us in person. We have stakeholders from the civil society, from the religious institutions, from the government institutions. So I do really hope we'll have multi-stakeholder dialogue here, and we will come up with some recommendations that will be cross-cutting on different levels. But we have also some participants joining us virtually. So I would ask my co-facilitator, Emiko, to either introduce the participants, or is it possible to hear them? Because I'm not so sure how does it work. Yes, please.
Hello,
yes.
Everybody.
Please.
Yeah, my name is Larry Macaulay. I'm the founder of Refugee Radio Network in Hamburg. It's nice to be here with you all.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ulla Siirta and I'm coming from Finland, Finnish Lutheran Church, and work on migration issues.
Thank you. So we have two people joining us virtually. Thank you very much for being with us here virtually. We would love to have you here in person, but it's good that we at least have this hybrid format so that we can be together at least like this. So I do hope that you will actually feel the atmosphere that we are going to create here and you will contribute to our conversation. So if you want to say something, if you want to contribute, please indicate that in the chat to our online co-facilitator, Emiko, and then she will actually give you the space and we can also hear from you. Before we start with our dialogue, before we start with speaking, before we start sharing our recommendations, and before we start with fruitful discussions, we have one input speaker that is joining us virtually, and that is Ms. Irena Guidikova. She's Head of Division, Inclusion and Anti-Discrimination of Council of Europe. She will give her input of 5 minutes here to us. And Ms. Irena, the floor is yours.
I'm really, really sad, Benina and all the participants, that I cannot join you physically. I would have liked to say hello to a few participants. Wait a second, I think I hear an echo. I don't know if that's okay, if that's normal, but so I'd love to say hello to a few friends that I have not met for a long time. Milica Pesic and Andrew Orton, probably others in the broader audience. You're such a diverse and inspiring group. I would have been delighted to be with you, but well, life is not fair. For my 5 minutes of introduction, how do you combat hate speech via intercultural and interfaith dialogue? Now that sounds like a really daunting task, like a bit like throwing buckets of water at a forest fire. I work at the Council of Europe, and for many years, the Council of Europe has put enormous efforts, really enormous efforts into combating hate speech in the 47 member states. We have carried out a massive campaign with youth called No Hate Speech Campaign and Alliance, with campaign committees in all of the 47 member states, with hundreds of organizations involved, with a parliamentary alliance, with local governments as well, with all kinds of intergovernmental initiatives. And still, here we are. Hate speech seems to be growing, especially online, and all the speakers today at this forum have pointed out how lost somehow we all are as to how we can achieve this immense task, how we can even start approaching this immense task of countering hate speech in our societies. Now, the Council of Europe has also adopted standards to this effect. The European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, ECRI, has its own general policy recommendation. And at this moment, an intergovernmental committee at the Council of Europe is working to develop an intergovernmental standard for a comprehensive approach to combat hate speech. And that covers a wide range of means, including legal and judicial measures, but also educational measures, awareness raising, support to victims, and especially, and very importantly, content moderation, because of course, hate speech is particularly pervasive and particularly harmful online. I would like to come back to the question of intercultural dialogue, though, and interfaith dialogue, with just few very short messages that stem from the experience I've had for the last 13 years of working at the local level with local authorities and other stakeholders to ensure that interculturalism is not just into dialogue, because dialogue is important, but I believe that action is even better. When intercultural dialogue is embedded in the policies, in all kinds of policies at the local level, also at the national level, but particularly locally, then it really becomes powerful. and that really mobilizes a lot of different stakeholders. Because, as you know, hate speech is something incredibly complex. And it's complex not only because it spreads so fast and so far, but also because in dealing with it, we should be very careful not to disrupt the delicate balance between protecting human rights, such as freedom of expression, and other rights, for instance, the right to life and privacy. So whatever we do for hate speech, we have to be very mindful not to encroach on freedom of expression, not to silence voices that represent the diversity of opinions and ideas in our societies. So what can intercultural dialogue, especially at the local level, do, and what can intercultural action do? I will only do a few snapshots because the question is very, very vast. Maybe some things that are not necessarily obvious for this audience. First of all, one particular area where local level is very important, I believe, is in ensuring equal access to meeting spaces. Minority groups, religious groups, often experience difficulties in finding suitable premises in which to meet and organize either worship or related social activities. And decisions by local authorities can be slow, very bureaucratic, and sometimes arbitrary to provide such spaces. One example of what can be done in this respect is what happened in Barcelona. The local authority issued clear guidelines for equal treatment of all groups in the use of public spaces and facilities, particularly for religious purposes and the celebration of major religious festivals in the public space. And the approach, the goal was to safeguard the rights of those who do not belong to religion. Similarly, in the canton of Neuchâtel, they have been working, I believe it's not yet adopted because it's a very controversial text. They have been working on a law, on a regional law, on secular, how do they call it? Inclusive secularity, meaning that the state does not distinguish or does not give preference to some religious groups or some faiths over others, especially when it comes to using public resources, including public space. So these are examples of how local authorities can encourage dialogue and can encourage equality in the first place between faith groups, because being equals is the first step towards meaningful dialogue. The second step would be to create spaces that are mixed, that enable, through meaningful interaction between people of different faith or cultural backgrounds. And there are many examples of such spaces. Some of them have worked, some of them have not really worked well for many reasons. If you're interested later on, I can tell you some stories that have not worked well. But one good story is in San Sebastian in Spain, where a temporary structure was created to be used by different faith groups, either separately or together, in order to carry out activities with the public. And it was a really tangible example of how public institutions can engage with faith groups in the public space to understand their needs and to respond to their needs, but also to their need of dialogue, of connecting to each other, of being in the same space. The intercultural dialogue, though, as I said in the beginning, is much more powerful when it's embedded in policies, in different kinds of policies. For instance, for local, when you create infrastructure or when you make planning decisions. I'll give you an example from a city in Sweden called Botkyrka. It's in the larger, broader Stockholm region, where any kind of challenge locally between different groups of society across diversity is directly addressed through what they call intercultural dilemmas approach. One example, a mosque is built in a neighborhood, and some residents complain of the noise of the prayer calls. They are disturbed. So the intercultural dilemmas workshops approach was used to engage with all those concerned and try and find a solution that works for everyone. Provide information, have people discuss face-to-face what are the issues and work towards a solution together. One thing to underline is that moderation, skillful moderation, is essential for these meetings to work. And in fact, many cities have taken the approach of appointing trained mediators that have the skills to facilitate good relations between groups and intervene in situations where difficulties are arising, especially before situations become too violent or too entrenched. And such mediators, they help address issues, for instance, in schools or in public services, and also counter prejudice and hatred. One interesting example of mediators is in Reggio Emilia in Italy, where mediators go even in the schools, in the schoolyards, in order to facilitate the interaction between children of different backgrounds. But all city institutions, including police, business organizations, trade unions, can become agents of dialogue and trust building by ensuring that all those involved are of diverse backgrounds and they interact as equals at all levels in the areas where these institutions are active. Another important message I'd like to mention is that faith groups and leaders should work directly with their members on prejudice and discrimination also among them, as well as against them. Because in each community, there are perpetrators of hate speech and even hate crime or hate violence. So it is really important to be aware and reflective about ways in which each religious discourse and practice can contribute to countering prejudice and discrimination. And interfaith initiatives can be very powerful in this respect. I remember an organization in Rotterdam that involved more than 60 organizations, including local mosques, women and youth organizations, to build relationships between diverse groups and enabling debate about prejudice and discrimination between these groups as well. And as you know, some of these issues can be also very political or geopolitical. So what is needed is also not only people who are aware about the faith and the word of the faith and the scriptures, but also people that have political awareness. And therefore, the relationship and the cooperation between public authorities and faith groups is really important, because political side can bring that political awareness as well. And I remember the director of that organization, which is based in Islam, recognized that, of course, prejudice and hatred are not intrinsic to Islam by any way. And of course, not all Muslims are involved, but there is still a need to tackle issues around anti-Semitism, homophobia, inequality of women, etc., among Muslims. And I'd like to quote him because I think his words are very, very strong. You cannot be selective in your solidarity. If you claim, as you should, that these are human rights, and you want just treatment of yourself and of your own community, you should also be self-critical of yourself and your own community and critical of your own views. I'd like to stop here because I think it's better if the participants have the chance to share their ideas. And of course, I remain with you until the end of the session. Thank you.
Ms. Guidikova, actually, I just wanted to ask you to wrap up, but thank you very much for your input. Besides Ms. Irina Guidikova, I will now give you a floor for 5 minutes to ask any question you would like to Ms. Guidikova. We'll have like 5 minutes for your questions and answers, and then we will proceed to our second speaker, and after that we will proceed to your inputs from your side. If you have any questions for Ms. Guidikova, please take the mic and ask, or everything was clear in the input. Miss Milica Pesic, por favor, please.
Thanks. Lovely seeing you again 20 years later, Irena Godikova. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I have one question related to something we discussed during the lunch, and it's diversity within a faith, within a religion. Our experience, Media Diversity Institute experience, is that many people need religious literacy, particularly journalists, and for some reason we are not talking about media yet since this morning. Have you come across any examples of discussions about diversity within a faith? We had a problem in Egypt, for instance, where we worked for 12 years on different issues, intercultural communication, media, diversity, inclusion. When we wanted to talk about diversity within Islam, we were warned not to go into that direction. And I would say, the same about other confessions. What's your experience in this field? Thank you.
Shall I respond?
Please.
Thank you, Milica. I'm really delighted to see you again, even under the mask. Yes, diversity within faith and diversity within minority groups is one major parameter of the intercultural integration approach Council of Europe has been piloting. And it goes really directly in contrast with what we call classic multiculturalism, where each group is somehow represented by a leader or by a spokesperson who is usually somebody who is a guardian of tradition, somebody quite aged, a man usually. So the internal diversity of groups is neglected. And this is one reason why, in fact, there's also so much prejudice, because when you don't see different facets of a group, of a community, you see it represented by one or a few people whose views are very monolithic. Then that creates a really wrong impression of what a group really represents. So whenever we work with local authorities and with stakeholders, we are really attentive to make sure that, for instance, when there are structures created locally, for instance, intercultural councils, that groups be represented not by somebody who is the natural leader, but that an effort is made to bring in women, young people, maybe people with diverging views, people from minority views within a faith group. So that's one way of approaching that. Another example was when we were discussing with colleagues in Oslo about how do they go about gender equality in Muslim communities, and how do they raise awareness or support a more human rights-based understanding about gender equality. They informed us that they're really supporting youth groups, Muslim youth groups that have more, let's say, progressive views about gender equality than some other parts of the community. So by empowering them and by giving them the possibility to be active and present within the community, those ideas and those the notion of gender equality was more easily propagated. I would say that in general, it is important to empower those different voices, to find them and to empower them, to give them platforms in public meetings, to give them resources, to give them roles. And this is how that diversity should play its role. Of course, it's not always easy, but it has to become a part of the internal constitution of both local authorities and any donors or anybody who supports such actions.
Thank you, Ms. Guidikova, and thank you, Ms. Pesic, for your question. Are there any questions? Please, I think the mic is here.
I would like to ask Ms. Guidikova about her opinion on the role of big tech in accelerating hate speech and maybe also being majorly responsible for hate speech, or whether she not see that as the problem?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Alex from UNHCR mentioned that aspect very well in this morning's panel. It is clear, first of all, hate speech has always existed in human societies, but it is clear that in the age of social media, and given the business models of social media that thrive on pushing divisive and controversial content that provokes people and leads to more engagement, hate speech has become a phenomenon that is so pervasive that it's almost impossible to eradicate. And clearly, big tech, internet intermediaries, corporations have a responsibility. I mean, you know of the U.S. Senate inquiry in Facebook and the algorithms. Even in America, which is the country where freedom of expression is an absolute value, the question of sanctioning, regulating social media corporations for deliberately creating conditions for hate speech to propagate, despite its social effects and negative effects on many areas, including on human rights and on democracy, because it silences voices. We see a real turn. Internet intermediaries, social media giants, they invest quite a lot of money on content moderation, and still it's drop in the ocean. It's still the importance and the financial aspect of making money through hate generating algorithms is stronger. In some countries, like in Germany, there are legal frameworks that are obliging corporations to take down hate content within a day. It's something that's working, but it's still far from sufficient. In fact, the real filters should happen before hate speech is even out in the network. There is an interesting initiative by Twitter, maybe you have heard about it, where a potential hate speech message, hateful message, is stopped by the system before it actually sent, and the user receives a warning that they're maybe about to send the hate. And just by just giving the user the chance to step back and think for a second, that actually stops, I think, about 16% of hate messages. 16% is probably more than any government intervention so far has managed. So I believe that when the internet companies really decide to do something, they can do it and they can have an important effect. So one part of, I think, of all the advocates' work is to engage with them and convince them that it's not only their civic responsibility, but it's probably also a way to find a new business case.
Thank you, Ms. Gridikova, also for your answer. Maybe we should proceed now to our second speaker, because we also need to discuss here. Our second speaker is Mr. Larry Moore Macaulay from the Refugee Radio Network. And Mr. Macaulay, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your input. I think you need to unmute. We still cannot hear you. It's still not there. We cannot hear you. Yeah.
Hello?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. You want me to respond to the general topic or to the last speaker's message or delivery? What was the question again?
Whatever is
Can you still hear me
convenient
or
for
not?
you. We would like to hear your input on the combating hate speech against refugees and migrants through interreligious and intercultural dialogue.
Okay. Well, talking to each other every time is necessary in order to deconstruct the violence, the myth, before the violence. You know, it's very necessary. And I think religious institutions do play a key role in our lives, in our societies, and they are quite strong. So they are like a key, a bridge to solving issues in our communities. So I feel, in my opinion, they are important and they are necessary. And the approaches they follow sometimes might not be the right one, but they are key to stopping violence before it starts. Social media companies, as everybody has said, from the morning till now, play a key role now in our lives. Everybody carries a smartphone or a smart device. Information travels super fast like never before. And then that tool has become a very dangerous tool in our societies. With the tweak of a fake message that spreads on Twitter or on Facebook, violence can erupt in a second in countries and in communities that are a little bit, how will I put it, vulnerable to rumors. So regulatory authorities need to do more. I think social media companies at this moment, they need to be regulated for sure, because I've seen firsthand what that can do in our communities. In my country, Nigeria, that I come from, the country was almost burned down last year. And very unfortunately, one of the CEOs of, actually the CEO of Twitter played a key role in that action. Whether you agree with me or not, that's another issue for another day. So in my opinion, yes, it needs to be regulated. Religious institutions play a key role. We saw what the Pope did some years ago. He had a strong, the Catholic Church had a very strong stand on giving rights, even up until now, to migrants and refugees in European societies. So for me, in general terms, I think it is necessary. They play a key role. But I think the message they also pass out must be tolerant, mustn't be xenophobic in nature. It's not all religious institutions that are on the same level. So we need to work with our religious clerics, teachers. We need to continue dialogue with this kind of forum that you guys are organizing. I think it's a welcome development. This helps us shape our society. In a nutshell, that's my delivery.
Thank you very much, Mr. Macaulay. I hope I didn't butcher your surname. Are there any questions from our audience, from our participants, that you would like to ask, Mr. Macaulay? Please, the mic is there.
I would like to ask him the role of music. I mean, he's the founder of the Refugee Radio Network, and the role of music and combating hate speech in the communities.
Yeah, music. We need to use every tool at our disposal to fight this. We need music messages must also be very tolerant, must also have messages. That is lacking in our society now, especially with the young trends of music, because the easiest people to use in every violence that erupts out of fake news are young people. And I think music has not been used in modern times like it used to be done in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s. And we need to work. I always tell young people to sing about things that are more relevant to their society. Some do. Secular music doesn't go in that direction, but we can we can work towards that. Yeah, music is a key. It's the weapon of a political message. Burna Boy sang a song a year ago or 2 years ago, which had a very strong impact again for the youths. Youths are hungry everywhere, and political leaders need to sit up. If not, things can get the other way around. Religious leaders also need to sit up. They need to connect with young people because the divide is getting wider. And I think music, yeah, you're right, music plays a key role in delivering messages to the wider community. Jingles are played on radios. Music commercials, like message commercials, are used through music jingles on radios to send out message and so on and so forth. And that's very important to quickly get messages out, whether it's on radio, whether it's on new media. It's very key before all hell broke loose. And violence is something I do not like to witness anymore. I've had enough of it. So it's key to sending out messages, music, and also to motivate people.
Thank you very much for your answer. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Makuli? No. So thank you very much, Ms. Guidikova and Mr. Makuli, for your inputs, and thank you for all your questions. But today we had the opportunity to hear about the input paper and the research that was done on hate speech initiatives. And you had the opportunity to hear from Ms. Olivia here on the stage speaking about this input paper. You also had these input papers, you got them in the app, in the emails. I do hope you had the opportunity to read them. If not, you can also do it tonight, because we will definitely need you to read those inputs, at least the recommendations part, so that we can actually discuss tomorrow about the recommendations that we are going to form and that we are going to present on the closing session tomorrow. But we actually heard that there are the root causes of hate speech that are not addressed, one thing. And the second thing, who are the perpetrators of hate speech? So my question goes to you. Who are actually the groups, the perpetrators that are somehow producing the hate speech, and who are, putting it there in the space, and how we can, reach to those groups? So in your work that you work either in religious institutions, government institutions, CSOs, FBOs, have you been able to identify those groups, and what do you do? So the floor is yours. Mics are on the table. Please take the mic, and if you wish to address us, please.
One thing I've worked on over the years with a number of different people is around giving strong identity to people who are really feeling vulnerable about their own identity. And particularly in Britain, in some of the areas I work in, that would be the white host community, if you want to use that phrase, and particularly those from a lower socioeconomic background who often struggle with forming a positive identity. And that can sometimes be reinforced by others unintentionally. So I've got lots of experience and anecdotes of schools who have done things to try and be affirming, have said things like, come in your national dress day. And they go, well, what, jeans and a t-shirt? I don't have a national dress, so I have nothing. How many languages can you speak? Only English, so I'm less than because I only have one language. And there's a number of ways that language can be framed that makes people feel that they are less than because they are somehow not seen as exotic, which is also a problematic kind of thing. So how do we frame identity, and what kind of questions, what kind of processes do we put in place that allow everyone to have a really strong sense of self-identity that then allows space for others? Because often, in my experience, it's people who have a very fragile sense of self-identity that they start to identify themselves against others. At least I'm not you, but I don't know who I am. And the more we can help people have a strong sense of their own identity, it allows space for others. And that is also now being played out. We're working with other groups, particularly some disaffected young Muslims, and helping them find a positive identity when there are people who are saying, what are you doing here? Why are you here? All those kind of questions. So that kind of pre-work that gives people a sense of, I don't need to insult anybody else because I am so confident in who I am. But that's quite a big piece of work that we've been doing.
Thank you. I apologize for not knowing the name. Thank you. Anybody else, please?
This is very interesting topic, and we need much time actually for this, but let's share some of our experience and ideas. I would say, out of my experience and meeting with the different challenges last 20 years in Norway, you know, in Norway, comparing with other European and other countries where we had terrorist attacks by mainly Muslim individuals. In Norway, we had it by the far right. And some days ago, we had third one, almost. It is not qualified as the terrorist attack, but you can say that it has to do with that. And we don't know who this person actually is, because he pretends actually to be a Muslim, you know, converted to Islam. And we tried actually to find out if it is true. According to me, it's not true, but we will work on it. According, as I said, to my experience, people in trouble, it might be family trouble, health trouble, economic trouble. Those people have great potential to hate. They need some reasons. They need some people who can motivate them, who can push them, who can inspire them. Those who do it, unfortunately, today, there are several elements, several factors and sources of motivation for those with potential to hate. Unfortunately, a number nationally, when we speak, number of well-profiled politicians do it and make out of those individuals who have trouble, they make them hate. That's something we talk openly now in Norway. Because, you know, when you repeat one thing 20 years, and we have politicians who do it last 15 to 20 years, saying that Muslims are not compatible with the Western society. Islam is not compatible with the Western society values. No chance that so many people do not take it as it is and start hating us, hating Muslims, and targeting Muslims. In Norway, they didn't do it directly, but they did it indirectly because the Labour Party was Muslim-friendly party, because Breivik, who did it, he said it. Because the Labour Party opened the door for Muslims and for other foreigners. So this is, I mean, so that's why to hate, you can find candidates. This is the time when we talk very much about poverty. Poverty is not only in Africa and Asia. Poverty now is in Europe, in our societies. In very wealthy Norwegian society, poverty. So we have people who are poor, many people who are poor, and they are good candidates to hate, especially now using the social media, sitting at home, especially again using the corona time and of course being inspired, pushed by so many negative narratives of others. So that this is part of my contribution, but I'm very interested in this, what you said about diversity within the Muslim society. I mean, I would really talk about that because I deal with that last 20 years. I lead the Muslim community that consists of all Muslim nationalities. And I really know what is going there, but I would like to hear what's the problem there actually. What's the problem with the Muslim diversity? I know that they call us Bosnian Muslims. Some Muslims have prejudice towards us Bosnian Muslims and saying that we are light Muslims. I have no problem with that. I mean, you know, we exist over 500 years. If we are light Muslims, so I don't think that we would survive 500 years. But I would really like to hear concrete examples.
Thank you, Imam Kobilica, also for your contribution. And thank you for bringing up some other topics into this conversation. I am seeing lady there and then Mr. here, so please.
I'm Anna from Athens, Greece. I would like to go one step deeper because I agree with our brother from UK and Mufti Sinaid. We have to go a step and see deeper what is going on. We have worked with hate for years and years. And yes, this has to do with classes, has to do with policies. Unfortunately, Europe is facing, I come from Greece, where we are in the 12th year of economical recession. So the influx of refugees in the country, and you have to know, I say that I come from Greece because we have a disproportional number of refugees in the country due to the agreements. You all know about that. That ignites a wave of hate that is very convenient to the governments. Unfortunately, because if the governments want to pass austerity measures, the boxing sack is the weakest link of the society. And right now, the weakest link of the society are the refugees. Before, they were the immigrants from Eastern Europe, from Middle East that we have in the country. But now, they recognize in the face of the refugees a new goat that they can punch all the time. This is something that the media are enforcing all the time. And we see the mainstream media reproducing stereotypes, not helping, while they are having a rhetoric in the news of negative words, even phrasing. At the same time, maybe they have a social message afterwards that we have to be philanthropists and we have to be to hug all people are the same. But no, this is a matter of policies. We have to enter deeply, not only catch the poor guy that was fired from his factory and he has nobody to blame for his bad life, but the refugee that will steal his work potentially. We have to see the big picture and go back to our governments, to our policies, and say, come on here, we have to see this seriously because this affects us all. Even if the refugees disappear for some reason tomorrow, we will stay with those policies and we will hate each other. I mean, this is not a matter of the refugees are just in the wrong place in the wrong time. And the problem in Europe exists with or without refugees. That is why I strongly believe in policies, how we can improve.
Thank you, Ms. Anna. You actually pointed out really good thing, and that is something that also Ms. Olivia today said. We need to address the root causes within the Europe and within the host communities. It's not just about those who are coming, it's also about those who are hosting. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, with this notion of hate speech happens that something similar that happened with the term time. St. Augustine said that we all know what time is, but if you ask me what time is, I will say I don't know how to define time. I'm going to jump to another related area, which is not, let's say, the ground or more the expedient of hate speech, but about, and maybe this is linked to the work of the EU and Council of Europe and other institutions, about what hate speech is. So my concern is to what extent we are able to accept controversial or even offensive speech. So this is very clear in the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights. It's very clear that freedom of speech includes offensive speech. That's very clear. So, of course, we are all against hate. That's something that we all accept. My concern is, which are the limits of an acceptable, in democratic terms, offensive speech that does not go beyond and enters into a very troubling waters of hate speech? Because sometimes I see that hate speech is everything that contradicts my view or offends me. I'm sorry, that's not hate speech. My second point is about the relation between hate speech and hate crime. Because it's not just a matter of saying you're provoking hate, it's that you go to jail. That's very different. And I have a problem there. Because one of the main principles in criminal law is legal certainty. If we don't know which is the limit of hate speech, and it should go case by case, it means that it's against one of the principal and core, let's say, foundations of democratic states, that criminal law should be restricted, limited, and certain. The other point I want to bring is the question of offenses. So I work for the Catholic Church, which is, of course, now in Europe, in many countries, in troubled waters and with problems, critics, offenses. We're used to that. And we have to accept that to a certain extent, because in democratic systems, if I feel offense, there is always a legal right to go to a court. Not to beat anyone. You can defend yourself to make a statement, but this is the way that it works in democratic states. And my point is about if we also have to develop a sense of toleration towards critics and offenses. Because this is something that I think that the Council of Europe made a certain work. I don't know if it was a resolution of the Assembly that talked about oversensitivity of certain communities. I mean, one thing is that you are offensed, but I'm sorry. You cannot be offensed because you are very oversensitive as well. So I want to bring this point to the discussion as well, because I think that we are talking about something that is difficult to define, that is creating a lot of problems and even chilling effects. Because once you make so large notion of hate speech, it provokes self-censorship. Some people do not talk about honestly, do not talk in democratic societies about certain issues because they are afraid of being socially harassed or even made in media or even brought to the court. And I can tell you some examples. For example, 3 bishops, Catholic bishops in Spain, were brought to the criminal court just for giving a homily a Sunday. I think that's out of the limit of what we want to make in not only here, but in our democratic societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input. Definitely you brought up a very important question, and that's the question of defining hate speech, because there's no universal definition of what hate speech is, and each institution, including United Nations, has its own, European Commission, European Union has its own, and that's why we need to speak from various levels, from the FBOs, from the religious leaders, from the governments, from the CSOs, to actually come to a common ground. But I think I saw just behind you, and then Dr. Lakshmi, and yeah, please.
Well, I read the paper underlying this discussion, as well as listening to discussion. It just strikes me that we are all the time speaking about hate speech. And also there's some criticism in the paper for many of the interventions not really targeting the far right or those that are perpetrating hate. And I think with an eye on that sort of critique, it's good to talk broader. So thinking about my own constituency, European Jewish communities, they might not necessarily going out to reception centers and demonstrate against the arrival of Afghani refugees or whatever. But at the same time, they might also not being very helpful in terms of proactively engaging with the refugees to facilitate their integration, to welcome them, to be involved in community sponsorship programs, in integration programs and all of that. So there's a lot that can be done other than just talking about targeting the far right or preventing hate speech, that deals with trying to change attitudes, trying to create more empathy towards those that are seeking asylum. So, just to frame the discussion sometimes a little bit broader than focus on who we're targeting and talking exclusively about hate crime and hate speech.
Thank you very much. I think Ms. Lakshmi was, and then I don't remember the name, I'm really sorry. And then the floor will be yours. So the mic is here, please.
I would go on the media side. Actually, Goody Kova mentioned something like media, trained mediators. This is what she had used the word. So trained mediators, I mean, we have to define what trained mediators are, but definitely the media bosses, the CEOs of medias, Facebook, etc., and not only the social media, but also the TV network. Both of them needs to be monitored very properly. Both these medias, they are totally biased. So this needs to be done. So if any media mediators or trained mediators come in the way and stop the CEO bosses, media bosses from doing what they're doing now, that needs to be monitored. So instead, if steps can be taken at that level to curb the whatever hate speeches and hate writings go on in the media, definitely it can be automatically curbed at that level. So the rest depends on our government to government, how they manage it. So this is what I wanted to convey, that if we can monitor and stop the hate speeches in the media, definitely something can be attained. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please. Hi. Let's see if I can make a speech that makes sense, because I have a lot of ideas and agree with everything that was said. And I wanted to introduce some probably agreeing topic with José Luis, for example, about the concept of hate speech. That's a problem. But also we should meet the concept of hate speech with the concept of tolerance. Mm-hmm. If we are advocating for tolerance, what are we tolerating? Are we tolerating the intolerance? And I think this is a question that we should pose when we are speaking about hate speech. Because if I define hate speech as something I can say to incite an action of hate, a crime of hate, should I have a limit? Or it's something that I will have when whatever is different from my idea, it's a problem. And then other thing that was said about what is different. And here I am studying the populist discourse and this us versus them that you referred. And actually, right now, refugees are the scapegoats. Migrants are the scapegoats. And but there is something that we should also think about, that us as humans are scared of what is strange and what is different. So, and we want an explanation and a solution as the simpler as it gets. So if we can point the finger and say that is the problem, if I remove it, that is there is no problem anymore. That's what it's going to happen. That is why the far right is rising and the populists are rising. And another thing is that we can obviously look at the media and say that is also a problem. Social media is also a problem, but they only reflect what the society wants to hear. And I think it all goes through education, as the paper says, but it's very important that we put things in perspective as what are we tolerating, well, that's a lot of ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for pointing out the importance of education and importance of actually addressing what is behind the hate speech, because hate speech is just the tip of the iceberg. There is something, many, many things just under the surface. But I saw this lady, please. Apologies for not knowing the name again.
It's okay, and thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to take you a little bit back. I just want to say this is just a follow-up on the gentleman's statement. I'm sorry, I'm not good with names and I can't remember your name. Where I'm thinking we need to frame hate speech in a broader context. The reason being, are we just talking about hate speech as in spoken? Or are we talking about the hate that refugees and migrants experience? The reason I'm saying this is my organization works to support refugee migrant communities overcome the challenges of integration. And I'm doing this in the UK. And in the area where I'm working, or rather the host communities, they don't say anything bad. Mm-hmm. They don't speak against refugee migrant communities. They just act. Mm-hmm. It's in the way they look at you. It's in the way you ask for something from them. It's always a no. It's in the way where you, like where I come from, we are the UK City of Culture 2021, and there's a lot of art events going on. If refugee migrant communities are to perform something, they just don't turn up. But they will never say anything in your face. This is a community that can smile through everything and offer you tea and use the word darling in each sentence when they are speaking to you. But you know they hate you. They act it. So should we just stick to combating hate speech? Or should we frame it in a broader way to include all the hate? Anyway, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much for pointing out this forms that hate speech can take. It's not just written words, it's not just speech, it's many other forms. I saw Mr. Sevenkit, and afterwards, Emiko, you will have the word. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think there was something mentioned about media professionals and faith literacy from one colleague. I think this is probably one of the things that is kind of a gap, I think. It's mentioned in another paper, I think that's for tomorrow, somewhat, but there wasn't a recommendation for media professionals. Of course, there's this perception of who shapes who. Is the media just reflecting what is society, or is the framing of the issues shaping society? I think that's a tension that media studies will always deal with. But I think this is probably one recommendation that we can pursue to media professionals. And we have things like faith literacy for UN agencies. We have perhaps other sensitizations of gender issues for businesses, etc. But how can we promote this type of approach to media professionals? I think is something that we can pursue further.
Thank you very much. I think, Emiko, now the floor is yours, and then Ms. Pesic will get the word.
Thank you, Emina. I think, our colleagues mentioned about, the mitigation of hate speech, maybe through education, for example. But I think there are also, the roles of many people who are in this, right? Like, for example, the government. I would give an example of Myanmar, where I have lived for 7 years there. And for example, when there was this really hate speech between the religions, towards the Rohingya, it's really there is no control whatsoever from the government. And so, you know, it's really like also like the way to kind of manipulating the, you know, people, the groups, you know, to get into like the worst case of, you know, kind of like fighting each other. But at the same time, like when there was like, for example, the coup, you know, the internet was banned for a few days, you know, and no one can comment or say anything against the government, for example. So, you know, I think it's a lot to do with, I mean, we can kind of mitigate these like through, you know, awareness or like, you know, through education to make people, okay, you know, like, okay, let's not do this, like understanding each other through dialogues and so on. But at the same time, you know, there are many, I mean, other level of you know, measures that should be in place, you know, also to mitigate this problem.
Thank you, Emiko. Before I give the word to Ms. Pešić, just to remind our online participants, if you want to say something, please also indicate, write in chat, or just indicate somehow. We also encourage you to give your input. But Ms. Pešić, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Emina. Maybe just to clarify about diversity within a certain religion or faith. In 2012, we did a big study of how the media in the European Union cover ethnicity and religions. And we were shocked to find out that most of the media we monitored still believe that Europe is just Christian and white. So it was in 2012, and it's even worse now because we are still monitoring. So somehow journalists believe if you are a Christian or a Muslim or whatever Jewish, you are supposed to look certain way, to dress certain way, particularly women, Muslim women. We are now running this project Magic about Muslim women. So you are expected to. This morning we had a photo, one of the speakers showed a photo on which there were a lot of Italian politicians in black suits, and one of them was kissing with a Muslim lady, and you know there was a reaction where I was sitting. Well, we all know that some Muslim women would not touch a man who is not her cousin or husband, but some. So learning about how different communities within themselves deal with certain issues is very important for the media. That's what I meant. Religious literacy, when in 2018 we did a big conference in Brussels with big media shots, so media decision makers, how do you report on religion? We found out that many editors are, and that's okay, secular people. But you have to learn, if you're covering economy, then you have to learn about economy. So the same is with the faith, religion, and so on and so forth. I would love to know the answer to the question Emina asked, who are the people who spread hate? Some years ago, when someone asked that question, my first reaction was losers. But then I realized that actually many political leaders are spreading hate. And that's where I think the highest responsibility lies to political decision makers who, because the fish rots from its head, that's why then the voters can be saying this or that. And finally, maybe just to tackle something, gentleman from you, Alex, sorry, how you measure the impact. In media development world, it's constantly a question. And you know, you get the funding and then someone then measures. There are ways that are not simple, and I'll use just one example from Croatia, and it's from the project we did together with the EBU and some other organizations, New Neighbors. It was about contribution of migrants and refugees to the economy of Europe, because we constantly talk about human rights, and that's right, but contribution to economy and demographics is quite important. So there was a documentary which won quite a prestigious award we did within that project. And it's about Iranian refugees in Croatia. There is a demolished house in a central Zagreb. No one is using it, rubbish over there. And a priest comes and said, okay, we'll reconstruct this building, you know, for refugees and migrants to use. The whole neighborhood is against it. Oh, who are these, you know, Afghanis, Iranis, or whatever. Then Croatian television did a documentary, and it was aired, And suddenly the neighborhood changed and they said, yeah, so we can help rebuild the building. So sometimes there is an impact, but measuring the impact is a really sensitive thing, and you never, whether that means changing attitudes, changing behavior, it's another question. Finally, multi-stakeholders approach. If we don't work together, we're talking about media, civil society, educators, you will always, or they will always find a way to get away with hate speech. IT companies, they're desperate to work with civil society organizations because they believe that we are a bit naive. But we know that we are not friends with them. We see them as frenemies. They should see us as frenemies. So getting this special status as we managed to have finally with Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and we hope, Twitter, and hope soon with TikTok, when we contact them and said, this is a hate, this is a Holocaust denier, these are conspiracy theories, remove it, they remove it. And that's where civil societies can really do a lot without waiting to the politicians to change something. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pešić. I saw you, but just shortly, and then Mr. Alex.
Yeah, let me
shortly, please.
Let me just tell you two things. In Norway, we need examples. So Breivik, happened in 12/11. Second terrorist attack in 2019. After the Breivik terrorist attacks, we hoped, politicians, the society will be better, they will understand, they will do something concrete and so on. Unfortunately, it was not done. So the terrorist attack 2019 happened on the mosque, and right after that, it was really surprising for us. The government, in a period of less than 1 year, came up with the action plan against Islamophobia, discrimination, Islamophobia. I don't think that in Europe we have a country that has made it, that has the special action plan. So this happened. But now we are working on it. You have to give this action plan some meat. It has to have something. Our problem, back to the freedom of expression. Still, those people, again, after the second attack by the far right, we have people, we have actors, tendencies in the society who are not scared, afraid. They go on with their narratives, hatred, and they, of course, always and every time say, we have right to say whatever we want. And very concrete example, the form of hatred. We have one organization called Stop the Islamization of Norway. It's about 3, 4, 5 people. Mm-hmm. It is like a caravan. They go from city to city, taking with them examples of Quran, and they, of course, announce they are going to burn Quran in every city. And of course, the police, so that we have very good communication, very good dialogue, the religious communities with police, with politicians, media, and so on. What is irritating for me and for many others, our police department, our lawyers, they come to those meetings. We talk openly, and we say, you know what this might cause. Is there a red line? There must be a red line. Okay, freedom of expression, but where is the red line? They don't know. No one knows where is the red line. So someone has to kill someone else, so then it is actually the red line. Otherwise, no red line. So the definition of the freedom expression is really something that we need and must be done. I cannot do it. Someone else to do it. Those people who are experts.
I really have to give the word, I think, Mr. Alex, and then shortly, and then we have to wrap up because it's almost 4 o'clock.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But no, just in response, I mean, I think we have to acknowledge there's a huge marketplace for destructive dialogue that can become hate. And I think within that marketplace, there's consumers and there's purveyors of it. The consumers of it, I think, because of the way it flows, tend to almost be victims of it because they're being manipulated in ways that aren't readily apparent or not necessarily clear, but it can result in either hate acts or, I think, very harmful outcomes, like the situation on the border with Belarus now, like what we're seeing develop with the antipathy towards Afghans who might want to seek refuge in Europe. And it gets to your point about impact of programs, and I think where I would like to see some of the recommendations go is toward what collective outcomes can we do to actually create a bit of market pressure on the purveyors of this destructive dialogue, who have acknowledged that they know it's destructive, but there's too much money in it to tackle. But between all the faith groups, between the civil society groups, they represent constituencies. So it's not that we say, but this is bad and you know it, and appeal to their moral. I think that gets us nowhere. But can you sort of combine a series of policy outcomes in a strategy to tackle this at the purveyor level? Because, you know, when I was researching a little bit the past week, the Facebook whistleblower, which was fascinating its own, there was an article also about how Zuckerberg had contributed more than $400 million in the last election cycle. So they've bought the politicians, and the politicians are rightfully afraid to stand up to Facebook because the consequences are readily apparent what happens when you do. But how can that be countered? And that's where I think that sort of, and I think there's actually, if you take the faith actors and they can find a way to collaborate because they also represent constituents and consumers that can bring market pressure on this and sort of create, as Irina said, a new business model or create more space for other actors to break up the behemoths that are really engaged in destructive things. So I think there's different levels, but I think, you know, the good practice examples can tackle the consumer level at community level, and there you can see some results. But the much bigger nut to crack is the purveyors. Thanks.
Thank you. And then gentleman behind, just please shortly. I hope you have the mic.
Yeah, thank you very, very shortly.
Very shortly,
It was
please.
mentioned that we need a definition of freedom of expression. I would say that we don't need a definition of freedom of expression. Why? Because freedom and rights in human rights theory, either constitutional or international, they just recognize the right. What you have to define is the limit to the right. There's a presumption that you're free to do something. The limit should be defined, and you define that it should be proportional, necessary, with the same syntax. But we don't need to define what is freedom of expression. We need to define the limits. The second point is about Islamophobia. I think that there is a matter of terminology. I think that the EU, for example, has changed and prefers more and more to use the expression anti-Muslim hatred. I think it's more appropriate. We're not talking about phobias. This is not a psychological disease. That's another thing. Third, we have to include also anti-Christian hatred. There has been 1,000 attacks against Catholics and Christians in France, recognized by the Ministry of Interior in 1 year. Fourth, about hate and discrimination. I'm a parent of 3 daughters. I was going to hire an apartment for 3 daughters because we had a new one in Brussels. I was denied because children are very noisy. I was denied, you know, to have a contract, an apartment because of that reason. We don't talk about, I did not complain about that. About the question of not expressing hate, but knowing that this person hates me. I'm sorry, but this is not about hate speech. We are talking about the exteriorization. What I think, what I feel, what I believe can be right or wrong, but this is a matter of morality. It's not a matter of law. And finally, about the question of companies, about the question of TikTok and all these social platforms. There is a code, ethical code, which has been promoted by the EU. They want to go even to the law. If this is not successful, there will be a regulation. But my concern is that, again, coming back to the tradition of human rights, when there is a restriction by either a public authority or a private person in what is called the drittvirkung, the relation among particular persons, there is always the right to appeal to a court. So my concern is, will there be any type of legal right to a person who has been censored in the platforms? Because of course we have to clean the platforms, but we have to preserve the democratic stance that we have had for at least dozens or hundreds of years. Thank you.
Very shortly, because we need to wrap up, and I don't want to take time from your break, but maybe I'll take 2 or 3 minutes because we also started a little bit later. So, please.
Very quick. I think the other thing to think about is not just the far right, but the hate speech on the far left. There's been a big issue in Britain around anti-Semitism from the left, and even some quite progressive left-wing people being quite anti-Semitic. So there's an issue there that we need to also be aware of. And I do think there's a real issue about this thing about defining hate speech. If I look back at what was permitted in the 1970s on the television in Britain, if we set the red line then, misogyny and homophobia would be permitted because that was acceptable. And I'm pleased that it isn't, but it keeps changing. And I kind of think we need to keep on changing. And I also think there's an issue around, whilst I understand the issue about going to law, certainly in Britain you need money. And if you're a migrant and someone who puts hate speech out against you, the chances of you having the finances to go to law, I think, are probably minimal. And I think that's an issue about how we have equality of access to law.
Thank you very much. So it's almost time for our break. It's already 4 o'clock, but just bear with me a couple of minutes more. I would like to thank you for your discussion, for your inputs, for everything you said here. We just opened the topic. We just opened the floor for tomorrow, because tomorrow we will be working in groups. We'll be working on the recommendations. And it's important that you as a group come up with 3 recommendations that we are going to feed the policy document, that we are going to present tomorrow at the closing session as well. And I would like again to thank you. And I would like to just once more ask you to read the input paper about hate speech. There are 16 pages of the paper. It's quite long, but on the pages 11 to 15, there are recommendations. So please just pay attention to these pages 11 to 15, where you can find recommendations. I also did a summary, and I made 2-pager of these recommendations. In case you are interested, please just give me your email address, and I will send it to you so you can read it in a shorter version. These are very important for your work tomorrow, for the recommendations. They are very broad, but you can work on, making them more clear and making them into 3 very important recommendations. And I would just like to ask my co-facilitator, Hassam, just to briefly sum up what we talked about today. As I said, it's just basic. It's just very, very, very beginning of what we are going to do tomorrow. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Just very short, the main points that was discussed by all of the people. It was very important, all of them tackling different angles and ideas about the hate speech from the presentations and the speakers, and as well from the room. We have the hate speech against the freedom of speech, how they are interacting together, how to can understand the difference between this and that, how to target the hate speech and not to attack the other rights and freedoms. And having equality is in using the space and resources for diverse groups, like the authorities could help the different faith groups, for example, to use the resources of the space and transportation or others, not to have priorities for one group against the other, and to have not to be selective in our solidarity, to have solidarity with all the groups. As well, having the diversity within the same religious groups, it's important to understand this diversity within the same religious group, like not to have it to be represented by the natural readers, but also to give space and empower the different minorities within the group and the diverse inside the group, and to empower different voices to come and present themselves and be part of the discussion. As well, the other issue that took big part of the discussion was about the big tech and about social media and how the algorithm is forcing this. The problem that the business model of the big tech supporting the controversial issues, and the algorithm is helping sometimes to promoting hate speech. And there should be a solution for this by maybe advocating and involving the companies in finding a solution for this, or to create a business case to have support to have the companies take responsibility on fixing this algorithm and not to promote hate speech, but maybe the opposite. Also, music is a key role in delivering messages and to have huge impact on the young people. And also with the final discussions with identifying who are the groups who are doing the hate speech, there is different point of views that was presenting about the economic background of the people, about not just being people who are marginalized or having problems in themselves, within the family or in their life, and struggling economically or financially or within their societies, and they could just put the blame on the refugees or migrant communities. How we are framing a positive identity within them, not just to frame our identity as it is an opposite of the others, but to have our own identity. This, I mean, for the people who are presenting the hate speech. Also to search for the root cause, which could be the policies, and the refugees are just in the wrong time and the place. They are not the main reason, but to have to search for the root cause and defining what the hate speech is. It is a very complex and controversial discussion. Like the term itself, hate speech, have to be identified, and to understand what is hate speech, not just against my group or against what I believe it could be hate speech, but we have to find a logical framework to understand this. Also, the media professionals and educational, the faith-based, literacy is very important and play a role. And the other final thing that I write, not the final thing that was discussion, like it's about the social media is only reflecting what the society wants to hear, and this is a big problem. And thank you very much.
So thank you again, especially thanks to our virtual participants. For today, you can go and rest. And we have one last session for today after the break. And I invite you to visit our human library, all those who are participating here. Virtual participants, thank you again. Thank you for being with us. And see you tomorrow. Break.